with both the forehand and backhand volley. The contact point is very important to understand because it relates to both the footwork as well as where do I want to make that contact happen. On the backhand volley, if I turn, you'll notice my arm is in front, as I've mentioned before. So my contact point is right off my front knee. I may take my racket just a little bit back, but notice because of the continental grip, I don't lose the integrity of the strings. So then I make contact right off my front foot and I hold that finish, just like we talked about. So right off that front right knee if you're a right-handed player. On the forehand side, it's a similar thing. There is one element that you need to be aware of. As I turn, as I mentioned before, my hitting arm is the back shoulder. So my natural arm position is behind me slightly. So when I do turn, again, that idea of handcuffs helps keep my racket a little bit more in front of me. Now I want to step as I drive forward, then make contact with the ball. You'll notice that the contact point is just off my left front knee, just like the backhand was on my right front knee on the contact point. With the forehand and backhand volley, the footwork, the stepping into the shot or stepping back, I don't like to get really confusing here because you'll find that when you watch the pros, you watch top levels play, you'll see some variations with the step. You'll see some players delay the step, hit, and then drive. You'll see some players, especially when you reach a little far, they'll step, then they'll drive because their center of gravity forced them to step. My emphasis here is on both the forehand and backhand. If you can learn to step right on contact, you can't go wrong. The situation will dictate a lot of times that you may have to step early and then drive, or you may end up having to actually step back and hit a more defensive shot. But if you focus on, when you say get a forehand volley, to drive that leg right at contact. I can remember in the old school days we used to say stomp on contact. Stomp. It doesn't always happen that way at higher levels, but it's a great learning tool to find that rhythm of using the step in the right way. You may find that you'll step sooner or later on certain shots, but if you don't step at all, you're going to find yourself falling and off balance. So the idea here is to drive that step, and again, don't forget that back leg staying back. A lot of times the player will drive that leg forward and get so far out in front that this leg comes through and they end up pulling the ball too far to the left or they pull the ball wide. So remember that even if I drive big time with my front leg, I want to probably still remember to drive that other leg behind me on both the forehand as well as the backhand. Moving on to high and low forehand volleys. Remember, on the backhand volley, we tend to try to stay away from laying the racket back. The forehand volley, if it's high enough, we want to turn it into an overhead. We'll talk about overheads later, but if you end up with a very quick, maybe head high, a little bit head high, a little bit maybe higher than that, what you'll want to do is make sure you do the same thing we talked about on the backhand volley. And that is keep the racket open, slice that high volley, because again, what I call a reverse pendulum. If I have my arm up, my racket tends to want to go like this. Just like a pendulum down here, the pendulum up here does the same thing. Just like we don't want to drop our racket head and hit volleys like this, we don't want to hit high volleys like this. So what we do instead of that is we lay the racket back just slightly so it's open, just like down here. We set the racket to our target, and we drive that high volley, keeping that racket open. We're not covering the ball or trying to spank it downward, because remember, a high ball dropping is already going to reflect downward off your racket. When you try to add this to it, you're just going to bury it lower into the bottom of the net. On the low volley, remember, we're trying to hit the ball up. We got to clear the net. If we're very close to the net, we get that dipper right at our feet. We're going to want to add that slicing action so that we can control the pace of the ball without hitting it out. Control the ball with spin. If I add a lot of underspin, I can hit that ball with authority. I can actually hit that ball with authority and not have it go into the fence. I can slice that ball and keep it low, and that allows me to not become a dinker, allows me to keep that back person from being able to tee off, because by adding that underspin, I can hit it with some force. It'll hit and stay fairly low on my opponent's side of the court, forcing them to hit up to me again.